I work at Christian Aid. Part of my job is writing about climate change. Despite all the protesters down where the fracking is going on and the arrest of Caroline Lucas, you might have felt that climate change is slightly slipping off the radar a little bit. Maybe fewer stories in the newspapers. I think actually the number of talks on the subject here at Greenbelt this year is down on previous years. But sadly, just because we're not talking about it doesn't mean it's not happening. And sadly, it's actually getting worse as the world governments don't really do enough about it. So we've had big droughts in the Sahel last year. We had hurricanes in the Philippines that killed hundreds of people. Just recently, we had floods in India that killed 6,000 people. So yeah, it's all pretty grim, to be honest. And I don't want to be too doom and gloomy, but it is pretty bad. Despite all that, I'm actually reasonably hopeful. And my hope as a Christian is actually in the church, which you might think is a slightly crazy thing when here in the UK and in other developed countries the church is kind of losing its credibility with dwindling numbers and us being known more for arguing about whether a woman vicar can become a woman bishop. But back in the day, back in the sort of glory days, the church actually has got a pretty good track record when it comes to tackling the real big issues of global injustice. So we had apartheid in South Africa, which was brought to an end partly because of individuals like Desmond Tutu and supporters of organisations like Christian Aid. In the 1960s, we had a Baptist minister, Martin Luther King, leading the fight for human rights for African Americans in America. And in the UK, we had evangelical MP William Wilberforce that helped bring about the end of the transatlantic slave trade, which is a pretty good heritage. I think we can be pretty proud of that, to be honest. And if the kind of narrow-mindedness of governments isn't going to get it done, then maybe it's time for the church to step up to the plate. And it's a two-way street, I think. The church is at its most credible to the unchurched, I think, when it's focusing on making the world a better place rather than just squabbling amongst itself. So yeah, what's the next one? And I think climate change ticks all the boxes of a global injustice. So we've got like slavery, the people that are suffering the most, the people that are on the receiving end, are the people that actually didn't cause it. So the Bangladeshis that are swamped by rising sea levels and the sub-Saharan Africans without any livestock or crops contributed almost zero carbon emissions that are in the atmosphere now. And like slavery, the people that are suffering are the ones without any power to really do anything about it on their own. They need action from people like us in countries like Britain. And like slavery, one group of people, the rich West on the whole, have financially benefited on top of the backs of the poor and those on the receiving end. So we can enjoy our relative luxury because of our century-long carbon binge, but that's created the situations that exist around the world. So like slavery, it is a moral issue, it's an injustice issue, and like slavery, I hope that Christians can help to make it right. The governments of the world, understandably, I suppose, have often got very narrow domestic agendas, and they think about it in short 4-year election cycles. But the church is a global body. It's got members in all corners of the world. So it gives us a perspective that's much broader, maybe, than some secular politicians. We often talk about the persecuted church, and just this week, Christian Aid actually is working with groups in Egypt that are suffering persecution. But whereabouts in that whole issue is the thoughts for those being persecuted by an inhospitable climate caused by our continuing actions? Sometimes I think that in terms of climate change, the church needs to listen to the words of 1 Corinthians 12:26, which talks about when the body of believers, when one part suffers, all parts suffer with it, and when one part rejoices, all parts celebrate with it. But often that's not often thought of in terms of climate change. Another big issue is abortion. It's a huge hot button issue for many Americans in particular, and Christians around the world. Yet what about the unborn children who are going to have to deal with our mess? That's the other group of people that are going to suffer, and that's why it's not just a geographical injustice, it's a generational injustice. Children today don't have even a vote. Yet it's our elected leaders which are causing much of the climate change problem, and it's our children that are going to have to be the ones that clean it up. We talk a lot about the debt burden that we're leaving them because of the credit crunch, but what about the physical planet that we're giving them, and the cost involved in cleaning that up? But the Bible's got some radical things to say, particularly on issues of greed, about money, about self-interest, that's very countercultural. And again, I think that's a chance for the church to be prophetic about the self-sacrifice that's going to be required to deal with the climate change problem that we've got. So yeah, it can all feel a bit impossible, a bit overwhelming. But then think about Wilberforce. I mean, he was taking on the vested interests of the transatlantic slave trade. Or Martin Luther King, who was up against a racist, institutionalized establishment. Or Gandhi, who had to face down the might of the British Empire. As Nelson Mandela said, it always seems impossible until it's done. So two events coming up in the next few weeks and months for your climate change diaries. In September, the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, is releasing its latest report, the biggest ever report on the world's climate. That will hopefully put a few nails in the coffins of some of the climate change denialists in some of the leaked documents that are coming out already. Climate scientists now put it at 95% certainty that man-made global warming is taking place, up from 90% in 2007. The IPCC is the largest. It's got 2,000 scientists involved from 120 countries, and it was asked by the United Nations back in 1988 to track and report on the world's climate. So we're hoping that when they release this report that the world's governments will listen. The other event coming up in November is the next global meeting of world leaders, where they will be working towards a global treaty on emissions that will hopefully be agreed by 2015. And at the meeting in Poland in November, we're hoping to see some progress there. So yeah, just some final thoughts. It's not all doom and gloom. I think we've got some great, heroes that we can look back on and take inspiration from. For Wilberforce, Gandhi, King, and Mandela, it was their struggle that made them great, and they got their hands dirty in the business of politics, and they changed the world. And our struggle for climate justice will be difficult, but it's doable. It will involve campaigning, advocacy, marching, writing letters, but I think we're worthy of it, and I think we can do it. Thanks very much.